The dust tasted of failure. Arthur Penhaligon ran a calloused thumb over a withered squash vine, the leaves brittle and yellowed under the relentless Nevada sun. Here, on this 10-acre plot of baked earth, he was Arthur Cole, a man with nothing but bad luck and a worse well. The deception was his own design, a bitter penance and a desperate sort of test. Back over the ridge, the Penhaligon ranch sprawled across 50,000 acres, with 1,000 head of cattle and a name that carried weight from Carson City to the rail depots in Utah. But wealth had become a gilded cage, attracting women who saw only the shine of his name, their smiles as calculated as a banker's ledger. So he had bought this forgotten homestead under a false name, determined to find a woman who would stand by a poor man with nothing to offer but blisters and debt. He had been at it for 6 months, and the experiment was a resounding failure. 2 prospective brides, arranged through cautiously worded letters, had taken one look at the cracked soil and the clapboard shack and been on the next wagon out of Jericho Springs before sunset. The townsfolk treated him with a kind of weary pity, the sort reserved for men who tried to fight the desert with a shovel and a prayer. He was a fool, but he was a stubborn one. He would see this through until his spirit broke or the ground did. That afternoon, as he was hauling up another bucket of silty, half-hearted water from the failing well, he saw her. She was walking along the dry creek bed that bordered his property, a basket hooked over one arm. The town knew her as Lin Mai, the river widow. Her husband, a laborer on the Central Pacific, had been killed in a rockslide 2 years prior. The railroad had offered her a pittance and a ticket back to California, but she had refused. Instead, she stayed, living in a small dugout on the edge of town, keeping to herself. She foraged for herbs and roots the other women wouldn't touch, and was said to talk to the crows. The townsfolk left her alone, their suspicion a wall as solid as brick. She stopped at the edge of his property line, not looking at him, but at the wilting rows of beans. Her focus was so intense it felt like a physical weight. Arthur set his bucket down, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his arm. He expected her to move on, but she stayed, her dark eyes scanning the parched land with an unnerving intelligence. Finally, she turned and looked directly at him. "You are losing your water," she said. Her voice was quiet, with an accent that was clean and precise, carrying no hint of the pidgin English some of the laborious used. Arthur squinted. "Well's going dry," it was the same thing he'd told everyone. She shook her head, a small, definite motion. "No. The well is low. But the ground is stealing your water before it reaches the roots." She took a step onto his land, kneeling and crumbling a bit of soil between her fingers. It fell apart like fine sand. There is no life in it. It holds nothing. He had expected pity, or perhaps even scorn. He had not expected a diagnosis. "It's all I've got," he said, the word sounding defensive even to his own ears. Lin Mai stood, brushing the dust from her hands. "The creek is dry," she stated, looking at the cracked mud of the creek bed. "But a mile up, toward the hills, it runs under the ground. You can hear it if you listen at night." Arthur stared at her. He'd heard no such thing. He heard coyotes and the wind, the twin sounds of loneliness. "The ground there is different," she continued, her gaze distant, as if seeing something he couldn't. "Darker. It holds the water. If you bring that soil here, mix it with what you have, it will learn to hold the water again." A little at a time she looked from the barren field to his face, and for the first time, he felt seen. Not as a failure or a project of pity, but simply as a man with a problem that had a solution. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked, his voice rough. A flicker of something unreadable passed through her eyes. "I do not like to see things die for no reason." She adjusted the basket on her arm and turned to leave. "Wait," Arthur called out, the word escaping him before he'd thought it through. "I have a little bacon. And coffee." Not much, but the offer felt clumsy, inadequate. She paused, her back still to him. For a long moment, he thought she would ignore him. Then, she slowly turned. "For the advice?" "For the company," he said, surprised by his own honesty. Lin Mai considered him, her expression betraying nothing. Then she gave a single, sharp nod. "I will bring tea." That evening, they sat on the porch of his shack as the sun bled across the horizon. She had brought a small tin of oolong tea, and the fragrant steam felt like a small miracle in the dusty air. They did not speak much. She told him where to find the dark, loamy soil, describing a small ravine hidden by junipers. He told her about the pests that had eaten his first crop of corn. It was a conversation of problems, of practicalities, yet it felt more real than any polite parlor talk he had ever endured. He found himself watching her hands as she held the tin cup, the fingers long and capable. She was not beautiful in the way of the women he had known, with their soft hands and corseted waists. Her beauty was in her stillness, in the economy of her movements, in the direct, clear way she looked at the world. When she left, the silence she left behind was heavier than it had been before. The next morning, Arthur took his wagon and followed her directions. He found the ravine exactly as she described it, the soil rich and dark, smelling of damp earth and life. He spent the entire day hauling load after load back to his farm, his muscles screaming in protest. It felt like a fool's errand, trying to change the very nature of the land one shovelful at a time. But the image of her calm, certain face propelled him forward. For the first time in months, he was not just enduring his failure, he was actively fighting it. He did not see her for 3 days. He worked until his hands were raw, mixing the dark soil into his vegetable beds, reinforcing the small irrigation ditches he dug. The work was brutal, but it was honest. On the 4th day, she appeared at the edge of his property again, this time carrying not a basket, but a bundle of long, thin willow branches. "The ditches are wrong," she said without preamble. "They are too wide. The sun drinks most of the water before it sinks in." She walked to the nearest ditch and pointed with the tip of her boot. "They must be narrow and deep. And you must line them." Before he could ask with what, she knelt and began weaving the willow branches together, creating a flexible, semi-porous mat. "This will slow the water and hold the ditch walls. It will guide it where you want it to go." For the next week, they worked together. She never asked for payment, and he didn't offer. An unspoken agreement settled between them. He provided the heavy labor, digging the new, narrow channels under her direction. She provided the knowledge, her hands deftly weaving the willow liners, her eyes seeing the subtle slopes of the land he had missed. They spoke little, but a rhythm grew between them, a shared language of soil, water, and sweat. He learned that she was observant, noticing the way a hawk circled as a sign of snakes, or the way the ants built their hills high as a prediction of rain. He learned that she possessed a quiet, unyielding patience, a quality the desert demanded and he had never truly learned. The town, of course, noticed. Whispers followed them when Arthur went in for supplies. "That poor fool Cole, letting the river widow fill his head with her strange notions. She's got him under some kind of spells." Mr. Barrow, the portly man who ran the mercantile and held a seat on the town council, pulled Arthur aside one morning. "Son," Barrow said, his voice slick with false concern, "a man's got to be careful about the company he keeps. That woman. She's not right. Lives like an animal. It's not proper for a white man to be spending his days with her kind." "She's helping me," Arthur said, his voice level. He kept his gaze steady. "Helping you run yourself further into the ground," Barrow scoffed. "Listen, I like you. You're a hard worker, even if you ain't got the sense God gave a goose. I've got a niece back in Ohio. A good, strong girl. I could write a letter. I'm not looking for a wife, Mr. Barrow," Arthur said, the lie tasting like ash. "You should be," Barrow said, lowering his voice. "A man alone out here gets strange. Look at what's happening to you already." He gestured vaguely in the direction of Arthur's farm. "You need a proper woman to set you straight." The conversation left a sour taste in his mouth. Barrow's concern wasn't for him, it was for the disruption of the town's rigid order. Linmai was an anomaly they could not categorize, and their partnership was an even greater one. The prejudice was a casual, choking thing, and it made him protective of the quiet space they had carved out on that failing farm. He did not yet know that Barrow's meddling was only just beginning. One afternoon, the pump on his well gave a final, rattling gasp and seized completely. The metal arm wouldn't budge. Arthur fought with it for an hour, sweat stinging his eyes, his frustration mounting with every failed attempt. Without the well, even their improved ditches were useless. It was the final straw. He sank onto the edge of the well housing, his head in his hands. The farm was doomed. The entire ridiculous experiment was over. Lin Mai found him there. She looked at the broken pump, then at his defeated posture. She didn't offer empty words of comfort. Instead, she walked to the small toolshed, emerging with a hammer and a long iron pry bar. "We will fix it," she said. "It's broken clean through," he grumbled. "The piston's likely cracked. I'd need a blacksmith, and I can't afford 1 inch." "Then we will be the blacksmith," she replied, her calm a stark contrast to his despair. She handed him the pry bar. "Hold this here. We must free the arm first." For 2 days, they worked on the pump. It was intricate, frustrating work. She seemed to have an innate understanding of mechanics, seeing how the pieces were meant to fit together. She showed him how to heat a bent metal rod in the cookstove fire until it glowed red, then hammer it straight again on a flat rock. They used bacon grease to lubricate the stiff joints. Their hands were black with grease, their faces smudged with soot. In the close confines of the work, their arms brushed, their shoulders bumped. A new kind of intimacy grew, born from the shared struggle against a piece of stubborn iron. Late on the second day, with a final, protesting squeal, the pump handle moved. Arthur pushed it down, and with a gurgle and a sigh, a stream of clear, cool water poured from the spout. He let out a whoop of pure, unadulterated joy. He turned to Lin Mai, and without thinking, he wrapped his arms around her and lifted her off the ground, spinning her in a circle. She gave a startled cry, her hands flying to his shoulders. When he set her down, they were both breathing heavily, standing closer than they ever had before. The smell of wood smoke and hot metal was on her clothes. He could see the fine lines around her eyes, the faint smudge of grease on her cheek. The laughter died in his throat, replaced by something else, something deeper and more potent. Her eyes were wide, and in their depths, he saw not fear, but a reflection of his own surprise. He dropped his arms, stepping back as if burned. "Sorry," he mumbled, turning away to hide the flush he felt creeping up his neck. "Got carried away." "The water is good," she said softly, her voice a little unsteady. The moment passed, but it left an invisible mark on the air between them. The barrier of their formal, working relationship had been breached. That night, a storm rolled in, the first real rain of the summer. They stood on the porch together, watching as lightning spiderwebbed across the sky and the thirsty ground drank its fill. The sound of the rain on the tin roof was a soothing drumbeat. "My husband," Lin Mai said suddenly, her voice barely a whisper above the storm, "he believed in machines. He said they were the future." The railroad was a great iron dragon that would connect the world. She paused, her gaze fixed on the rain-swept darkness. "He said men who built such things were like gods. But the mountain did not think he was a god. It fell on him as easily as it would a field mouse." Arthur remained silent, sensing that she needed to speak more than he needed to respond. This was the most she had ever offered about her past. "The foreman from the railroad came to my tent. He said I was a problem. A Chinese widow with no family here. He wanted to put me on a train, send me to a community in San Francisco. A place where women like me were taken care of." The way she said the words made it clear what kind of care it was. "I had a little money my husband had saved. I took it, and I walked away from the camp in the night. I walked until I found this town." "Why here?" Arthur asked quietly. "Because no one knew me," she said. "I thought I could be invisible. But being invisible and being alone are not the same thing. The people here, they look at me and see everything they fear. I am a woman alone. I am Chinese. I am other. So they call me crazy. It is easier than trying to understand." He finally understood the steel in her spine. It wasn't born of bitterness, but of a profound will to simply exist on her own terms. She had faced down a powerful company and a hostile world and had not broken. "I don't think you're crazy," he said, the words feeling small and insufficient. She turned to look at him, her face illuminated by a flash of lightning. A small, sad smile touched her lips. "You see a good farmer, Arthur Cole. But you do not see me either. Not all of me." The weight of his own deception pressed down on him. He was a fraud, playing a part. She was sharing the painful truth of her life, while he was living a comfortable lie. He wanted to tell her everything, to confess his name and his reasons, but the words caught in his throat. Fear held him back, the fear that she would look at him with the same calculating eyes as all the others, that the trust they had built with their hands in the dirt would vanish the moment she learned of his wealth. What he felt for her was fragile, a new green shoot in his own barren life, and he was terrified of crushing it. The rain stopped just before dawn. The air was washed clean, and the farm seemed to have taken a deep, satisfying breath. The plants, which had been struggling, now stood taller, their leaves beaded with moisture. The new ditches had held perfectly, channeling the excess water away from the roots. It was a morning of promise. But their peace was not to last. A horse and buggy rattled up the lane later that morning. It was Mr. Barrow, and he was not alone. A grim-faced man with a U.S. Marshal's badge pinned to his vest sat beside him. Barrow climbed down from the buggy, his face a mask of smug satisfaction. "Morning, Cole. Or should I say, Penhaligon?" The name hit the quiet morning air like a gunshot. Arthur felt the blood drain from his face. He looked at Linmai. Her expression was perfectly still, her eyes fixed on Barrow, but he saw the flicker of confusion, the instant wall that went up behind her gaze. "I don't know what you're talking about," Arthur said, his voice flat. "Oh, I think you do," Barrow said, enjoying himself immensely. "Took a little doing. Sent a telegraph to the territorial capital. It seems a Mr. Arthur Penhaligon owns a rather large cattle operation over the mountains. An operation that has been buying up water rights all along this valley. Funny thing, that." The marshal stepped forward. "Is that your name, sir?" "Arthur Penhaligon." There was no point in denying it. "The game was over?" "It is," Arthur said, his eyes never leaving Linmai's face. He could see the hurt dawning there, the subtle tightening of her jaw. It was worse than he could have imagined. Betrayal was a cold, sharp thing. "This man has been deceiving this entire community," Barrow announced, his voice rising for the benefit of any neighbors who might be listening. "And he has been taking advantage of this poor, unfortunate woman." He turned to Linmai, his tone dripping with false sympathy. "You don't have to be afraid. We're here to help. This man misrepresented himself to you. You have a legal claim against him. You sign a complaint, and I will personally see to it that you are well compensated for your trouble." It was a clever trap. Barrow was using her, using the town's prejudice against her, to get at him. He wanted to ruin Arthur's reputation and likely get his hands on some of the Penhaligon money in the process. Arthur waited for the inevitable. He waited for her to turn on him, to unleash the anger and hurt he so richly deserved. She had every right. Linmai was silent for a long time. She looked at the thriving green plants in the field. She looked at the repaired well pump, gleaming in the morning sun. She looked at the neatly woven willow branches lining the ditches. She looked at the farm they had built together from nothing. Finally, she raised her eyes and met Barrow's eager gaze. "There is no trouble here, Mr. Barrow," she said, her voice clear and steady. "This man and I are partners." Barrow's jaw dropped. "Partners? He lied to you. He's a millionaire, for God's sake." "He is a man who was not afraid to get his hands dirty," she corrected him calmly. "He is the man who helped me fix a broken pump and worked beside me in the sun. His name does not change the work we have done." She took a step to stand beside Arthur, a small but unshakable movement. She looked at the marshal. "This is our land. I would ask you gentlemen to leave." Her loyalty was a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. She had chosen him. not the name, not the money, but the man she had worked with. In that moment, he felt a shame so profound it almost brought him to his knees, followed by a wave of gratitude that was just as powerful. He had come here looking for something real, and he had found it. But he had nearly destroyed it with his own fear. The marshal, a man accustomed to reading people, looked from Barrow's sputtering face to the quiet dignity of the two people standing before him. He tipped his hat. "Seems like a civil matter to me. Not a federal one. Good day to you." He climbed back into the buggy, leaving Barrow standing alone, his trap sprung on himself. Barrow shot them a look of pure venom before scrambling back into his seat and riding away in a cloud of dust. When they were gone, a heavy silence descended. Arthur finally turned to face Lin Mai. "I am sorry," he said. The words were stones in his mouth. "I was a coward. I was afraid you would. That you would be like the others." She did not answer immediately. She walked over to a row of tomato plants, pinching off a yellowed leaf. "When I first saw this place," she said, her back to him, "I saw a man who was trying to force the land to do his will. The land was winning." She turned around. "But then, you listened. You learned to work with the land, not against it. You learned its language." She looked at him, and her eyes were not angry, but searching. "Which one is the lie, Arthur? The rich man who hides, or the poor man who learns?" "I don't know anymore," he admitted, his voice raw. "But I know the man I want to be is the one who worked beside you." A year later, the 10-acre farm was an oasis of green. The produce from the Colmy homestead, as the sign at the end of the lane read, was known for its quality. Wagons from the railroad camps and even from as far as Virginia City came for their tomatoes and squash. Arthur Penhaligon still owned his ranch, but he spent most of his days here, on this small plot of land that had saved him. He had used his resources not to crush his neighbors, but to help them, financing a new, deep well for the town and exposing Barrow's long history of fraudulent land claims. Barrow was gone, his influence broken. Arthur and Lin Mai were married that autumn, in a quiet ceremony on the porch of the shack, which was now a proper small house with a sturdy new roof. Their partnership was the talk of the territory, a puzzle most people couldn't solve. But for Arthur, the answer was simple. He had set out to test the world, to find a woman of true character. But the test had been for him all along. Lin Mai, with her quiet strength and honest gaze, had not been the one on trial. He had learned that a person's real worth had nothing to do with the name they carried or the gold in their pockets. It was measured in the things they were willing to build, the hands they were willing to trust, and the truths they were brave enough to live. Standing beside his wife, looking out at the land they had brought back to life together, he finally felt like the richest man in Nevada. And that brings us to the end of this one. If you stayed with me all the way through, thank you. Stories like this one only get told because folks like you sit down and listen. If you liked what you heard, go ahead and hit that like button. And if you want more stories from the old frontier, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Until then, take care of yourself, and thanks again for being here.